Okay, so a little something different here. Someone sent me in a Q&A question about how I became a portrait photographer of children. And, I was going to set up my classic Fujifilm XH2S with the Viltrox 13 1.4 to get that nice, beautiful fall off. But you know what? I'm kind of in a hurry. Antarctica is looming on the horizon. And but I wanted to answer this question because I think it's funny, and I think it's actually kind of a good thing for a lot of you who out there who might be on the fence about trying to go from being a prosumer photographer to a professional photographer. And by the way, there's going to be some noise in the background. I can hear some guys doing some heavy machinery over there. God knows what they're putting. Maybe they're building a bunker for what happens after the 2024 election. I don't know. Just a thought. Could happen. Might want to dig in, people. So someone wrote me and said, like, how the heck did that happen? How did you go from doing the kind of photography you were doing before to being a portrait photographer for kids? Now, when you say I'm a kid photographer, it just sounds horrible, especially if you've come from any other genre of photography. I started in photojournalism. That's really sexy. That's really romantic. It's a lot of guys in black that wear scarves, and like you stand at a party and you kind of pose at the edge of the party and everybody thinks you're cool. You say I'm a kid photographer and people will run like you invented the coronavirus. They don't want to be, other photographers don't want to be around quote unquote kid photographers. So I had no intention of being a kid photographer. This was not something that was ever on my radar until it happened. So I spent, I don't know, let's just approximate here. I spent 5 years as a photojournalist, maybe longer. Let's say 7 or 8 years as a photojournalist. Then I transferred over to magazine freelance, mostly free, little Lance, as my father used to say. Then I started doing a little bit of commercial work. Then I started to get a few advertising jobs. I did not like any of that. I didn't like commercial photography. I didn't like advertising photography because advertising photography had more people behind the camera than they had in front of the camera. There was like a producer and an art buyer and the client and everything else. It just made me nervous and it wasn't fun because everything was staged. And that's not the kind of photography that I wanted to do. So I decided, like an idiot, well, let me back up. This is pre-idiot, depending on your point of view and how well you know me. I took a job at Kodak, and I worked at Kodak for about 4 years. I worked for Kodak Professional specifically. And I got a job at Kodak as a what historically was called a TSR, a technical sales rep. And the training program for the TSR program at Kodak was a year long. They moved you to Rochester, New York. Oof, I do actually like Rochester, but it's rough, especially when they move you there in the middle of winter. And I lasted 3 days, and they got so frustrated with me, they just said, go back to California and we'll figure something out for you. And so in the interim, I pitched them on a job that I thought would suit me. In a moment of infinite weakness, they actually accepted and said, that seems like a great idea. And I spent 4 years at Kodak. It was fantastic. I met a bunch of great people. They treated me very well. I learned a ton of things. I got all the film, paper, and chemistry I could use. Then the idiot comes in. Another photographer convinces me that I should leave Kodak and become a wedding photographer. Now, this is pre-wedding bubble, right? This is pre-people, hipsters that are social media experts coming into the wedding industry and basically creating a facade that they knew what they were doing and charging insane amounts of money for it, right? I was not part of that crowd. I came just before that crowd, and I left before all of them imploded. And by the way, I'm not necessarily knocking them for that. If you can do it, if you can create a facade, and I'll get to this point in a minute, there is no barrier for entry for wedding photography and portrait photography. None. It's not like photojournalism. It's not like editorial. It's not like commercial or advertising or fashion or automotive where there's an editor and an art buyer that's looking at you and saying, you are a clown. You have no idea what you're doing. Wedding industry doesn't have that. And the portrait business certainly doesn't have that. Anybody can do this. And there's an upside and a downside to that. So I become a wedding photographer. And everything was great until it wasn't. And then I fell out of love with doing it. I was making a lot of money, but it just wasn't that fun anymore. And by the time I started to get out of weddings, the industry itself had snowballed into this level of insanity. The reality TV shows like Bridezilla, there's a lot of really not too bright people out there that would watch shows like that and think, oh, this is acceptable behavior. This is fine. There's a TV show that's highlighting how crazy these people are. I guess it's okay. I have liberty and license to behave that way. Luckily, I never had a Bridezilla. But I just got tired of doing the business. I also got Lyme disease, and it was physically very difficult for me to perform for 8 to 10 to 12 hours at a time. It was physically right at my limit. There were times, the last job I turned down was a $40,000 wedding. I had done the older daughter's wedding a couple of years prior, and the younger daughter was getting married, and the mom called me. I loved the mom. I thought she was fantastic. And she said, hey, we want you to do so-and-so's wedding. And I said, well, if I did, it would cost double of what I did the last one. And she was like, no problem. And I said, look, physically, I can't do this. I can't take your money because I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can physically get through an 8 or 10 hour day. So I turned it down. My wife wanted to kill me, but you know what? There's nothing worse than getting into a wedding that's not right. It just sucks because you work with those clients a year in advance, and sometimes you're working with them a year after the event. So it's not just this one day thing that it can look like on the surface. So now I'm getting out of the wedding business. I'm looking at photojournalism. It's a minefield. It's in decline. Editorial's in decline. Pretty much, commercial advertising is in decline. The rise of the influencer has begun. People have lost their mind on Facebook, and I'm talking everyone, friends, family, professional colleagues, everybody's lost their mind on Facebook. Instagram is starting to come in. I'm like, I don't want any part of this. My neighbor, I'm living in California at the time. My neighbor comes over, and I love these people. They're awesome. She comes over. She has 2 little girls, gorgeous. One's a little redhead with absolute creamy white skin. I can't do ages, so I'm guessing maybe she's 8 years old. And then her younger sister, totally different personalities, totally different looks. One looks like the dad, one looks like the mom. And the little sister has a bob cut. And I used to hang out with these kids all the time because we lived on a cul-de-sac, and they'd be playing with their little tricycles and stuff. And we were super friendly. We'd have dinner over there. They'd have dinner with us, that kind of thing. And the mom comes over one day unannounced, and she goes, hey, do you photograph kids? And I said, absolutely not. And she goes, great, I'm leaving them here. And she just left. And she left both of the girls in my living room in the house. And both of the girls are standing there looking at me, dead silent. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do now? I was like, well, I'm just going to treat this like it's a doc assignment. So I got my Hasselblad and I got my Leica, loaded those bad boys up with some super silky smooth emulsions. I mean, just some gorgeous gold-plated, stellar platinum kind of emulsions. And I just started documenting them like I had been assigned to document them. And I shot all black and white film. I probably shot 3 or 4 rolls of film total. And then I sent it off for the processing and the scanning and the uploading and the FTP and the download and the tweaking. And then I showed the mom. And the mom came over and said, oh, this does not look like what I thought it was going to look like. This is interesting photography. This is not kid photography. This is a documentary photographer who happens to be photographing children. And unbeknownst to me, she told all her friends. And my phone started to ring off the hook from people and families saying, hey, can you do what you did for her? Can you do that for us? And that's how my child photography began. And so I was still very kind of reluctantly felt like I was kind of dragged into this. And again, your ego takes a hit because you're like, holy crap. If somebody asks me what I'm doing now, I have to go, well, I'm a kid photographer. And I used to do that for fun. I would go to New York to these big, highbrow, fancy, elitist, snobby, high-end photo industry, art world things. And when we were standing in circles of photographers who didn't know each other, and they'd be like, what do you do? Well, I shoot advertising for Marlboro. Well, what do you do? Well, I shoot fashion for Marie Claire. What do you do? I'm a kid photographer. And they would just scatter. It was like I said, I got a little touch of the hantavirus. They would just scatter. And my friends would go, why did you do that? And I would say because, one, it's fun, entertaining, and I love to torture people like that. They are on this planet for us to torture. And I thought, this is really great. I want to keep doing this. And so I found the whole thing kind of interesting, funny. But here's the other thing that happened. So I'm shooting 6.6 square negative and 35 millimeter black and white negative for the most part. And that was kind of my shtick. There was no one else in Orange County, no one else in Southern California that was photographing kids this way. That meant that my work was immediately recognizable, that people would look at it and they all said the same thing. Wow, this doesn't look like anybody else. I also didn't price my business like a lot of the classic portrait wedding photographers, or let's just say portrait photographers here, which was very low session fee, very high print cost, and also photographers, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's probably in the long run a better way to go. It just didn't fit my personality and didn't fit my lifestyle. I didn't want people to have to come to my house after the shoot was over. I wanted them to pay me a sizable amount of money to make the images. That to me was the most important part. Secondarily, they were paying me to edit the images because they didn't know what they were doing and they would never make the right decisions when it came to editing. And then 3, I would tell them, I'm not shooting 500 images for Facebook. I don't even want you to put my work on Facebook. I told every client the same thing. Do not post this on Facebook. That is not what I'm here for. I am here to make a single image that will be sizably printed, that will hang on the wall for you, these kids I'm photographing, and their kids. This is a historical lineage piece of what I'm doing. This is not a showpiece for short attention span morons on Facebook. I don't want my work anywhere near that. I don't want to be identified with that. And for the most part, people were really fine with that, and they understood that. I wanted to make pictures for the wall. I also charged a lot more for the session fee than I think anybody else around me, because again, it's like I just wanted to make my money up front and not have to worry about people buying prints or coming to my house to view prints and then coming back to buy them. I just didn't want that as a lifestyle. I just want to get on with my life and go do other things and other projects. And I never, even though this is what I did full time for 7 years, it was not something that I really, I didn't say to myself, this is the ultimate goal for me. Parallel narrative that happened was that I got approached. I was in New York City, putting out the vibe. And I got approached by an agency that was based in Canada. And they said, hey, we've been watching what you're doing. We love your work. We're going to watch you for a year, another year. And if we like the consistency of what we see, we want to sign you to a worldwide exclusive to represent your work. After the sessions are over, we would like to license those images for stock, international stock. And this was back before stock died. So this was actually a really good thing. I had friends making $20,000 to $30,000 a month in resales alone. So that doesn't include all the session fees and the creative fees from doing the shoot itself. This was $20,000 to $30,000 extra per month just based on resale. So I was like, okay, this is great. So they watched me for a year. They came back to me and said, we want to sign you to this exclusive. And I said, fine. So we did this thing. And they said to me, okay, here's the deal though. You can't shoot black and white and you can't shoot square. And I said, no problem. And then all I did was shoot black and white square, because I knew that there was a clientele out there that wanted black and white square. Because every time I'd go to New York and show my work, clients would say, commercial clients, advertising clients, they'd be like, this is exactly what we're looking for and we can't find it anywhere. So there was a huge disconnect between the agency and what clients were actually looking for. Not completely, because the agency had been around a long time. But I was like, hey, I'm a niche. I'm never going to compete in the color digital space. I don't want to shoot in the color digital space, even though I ended up doing a lot of color digital over the past couple of years of the kid stuff. Everything I came away with out of that time frame is a black and white square neg or a Leica 35 negative. That's the best work by far. And the digital is just too similar to what other people were doing. I'm using the same cameras. You're basically in some of the same locations. My style of shooting is very different. And the thing is, kids are fantastic. And here's my suggestion to you who are making the jump. I would take portrait photography over wedding photography any day of the week. I do not suggest you become a wedding photographer. I think that is a minefield. If you do become a wedding photographer, you have to have an ironclad legal agreement, because odds are at some point, if you're doing high-end weddings, you're going to get sued. That sucks. If you screw it up, you can't do it over. Portrait photography, on the other hand, is mellow and fun. And here's the best part. You become a member of the family. You develop relationships with the kids. In fact, just forgot about this. I had lunch 2 days ago with a woman here in town who just turned 30, and I met her when she was 11 when I first photographed her family in California. So, and by the way, 2 of her younger siblings during those shoots are getting married now. And so when I quit this style of photography and I reached out to the families and I said, look, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm actually going to move to New Mexico and change my career. Some of the kids cried, and some of the kids actually thought I was their uncle, because we used to joke when I showed up, hey, Uncle Dan's here to make the pictures. They literally thought I was their uncle. That's the one thing I miss about being a professional photographer, is the relationship I had with these kids, because they were so much fun. When I was new and they were new to me, I would go in with my Hasselblad, I would ignore the parents, and I would sit on the floor and load a roll of film. And those kids would be in my lap in seconds, because one, they'd never seen a Hasselblad, they'd never seen film before, and they were just mesmerized. And I, of course, act like a child most of the time, so the fit was nice, the companionship was good. I could relate to them, they could relate to me. And it was great. And you shoot for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours if you're lucky. Sometimes the family will, in fact, the person that I met when she was 11, who's now 30, I actually went with them on vacation once to an island somewhere and did a shoot with them on the island. It was a blast. Like, I felt more like a friend than a client, and that's a really fun thing to do. So if you're looking to like bridge the gap between prosumer and pro, man, weddings are a minefield. I just wouldn't do it. Portraiture is great, but here's what I said earlier. There is no barrier to entry. There are a lot of yahoos working in this space. Yahoos who basically said, okay, being a portrait photographer sure beats working in the dead letter department at the post office. So this is a market improvement on my life. Who's doing what? They go online, they look at who's a successful portrait photographer, and they just copy everything. They copy the gear, they copy the look, they copy the locations. And this is now standard practice across the board. When I started in photography, you would get blackballed immediately if you did that. Now people brag about copying. There is no barrier to entry. Consequently, the general public is so inundated with images and average images and idiotic things like Instagram that just flood them with nonsense. They often don't know what's good or bad. So part of your job is to educate them as to what's good and why. And the problem is, if you don't have any training and you don't really have a high skill set and you're just copying what everybody else is doing, then it becomes a battle over budget. And you don't ever want to put yourself in that position where you're like, well, you know, Billy down the street, he's a dipshit as well, and he's charging $12 for a session. So shit, I guess I got to charge $11 for a session. You know, you're in that battle. You don't ever want to be in that conversation. You don't even want to be in the conversation of being a kid photographer. You want to be a photographer, period. If this is what you want to do, and I'm not even suggesting you become a photographer at this point. What do you think, I'm crazy? Why not get a ski mask and like go look at the local 7-Eleven? I don't know. Could be a less risk involved. That's how I became a kid photographer, and I hope that was helpful. It's I got to hit the road, man. In fact, yeah, crap. I'm a bit late here, and I'm getting dangerously close to heading south for the Antarctic ice. Not the Arctic, other side, other way around. Take a right turn instead of a left turn. Yeah, should be fun. More on this in a minute, but good luck to you, my friends.